The snow fell relentlessly across the barren Wyoming landscape, each flake another nail in Katherine Blackburn's coffin. 3 days without fire in the middle of December 1873 meant certain death, and the threadbare cabin she'd inherited from her late father provided little shelter against the merciless winter. Her fingers, blue with cold, clutched the last possession worth anything a hand-embroidered silk shawl, her mother's final gift before succumbing to tuberculosis 2 years prior. "This is madness," Katherine whispered to herself, wrapping the shawl tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through knee-deep snow toward town. The shawl was beautiful crimson silk with intricate gold threading, but it wouldn't keep her warm if she couldn't afford wood for the stove. Beauty couldn't prevent freezing to death. Sweetwater, Wyoming was still 3 miles distant when the wind picked up, driving icy needles against her face. Katherine squinted against the assault, her worn boots sliding on the packed snow of the trail. She'd left Boston a year ago, following her father west after Mother's death, only to bury him 6 months later, leaving her alone on a homestead she couldn't manage and with skills ill-suited to frontier life. The town's buildings finally emerged through the swirling white, and Katherine nearly wept with relief. She stumbled toward the general store, hoping Mr. Peterson might take pity on her and accept the shawl as payment for enough firewood to last the week. The bell above Peterson's door jangled as she entered, bringing momentary warmth and the smell of coffee. Several men lounged near the pot-bellied stove, eyeing her curiously. She recognized most of them ranch hands and miners who sometimes stopped by her cabin to purchase the pies she baked when she had ingredients. "Miss Blackburn," Peterson called from behind the counter. "Lord have mercy, you shouldn't be out in this weather." "I had no choice," she said, her voice raspy from the cold. She unwrapped the shawl with trembling hands, laying it carefully on the counter. "Mr. Peterson, I need firewood. I was hoping perhaps we could make an exchange." Peterson examined the shawl, his weathered face softening. "This is mighty fine, Miss Blackburn. Your mother's, if I recall." "Yes, sir. The last thing she gave me." Peterson hesitated, and she could see the calculation behind his eyes. The shawl was worth far more than a load of firewood, but he also knew she was desperate. "I can give you a half cord for it," he offered. Katherine's heart sank. Half a cord might last 4 days in this weather. "Mr. Peterson, please, I need at least a full cord." The door opened behind her, bringing a swirl of snow and a tall figure that cast a long shadow across the wooden floor. The conversations in the store quieted. "That's a mighty poor trade for such fine silk, Peterson." The voice was deep, with a hint of Texas that Katherine recognized immediately. Vincent Forrester had arrived in Sweetwater last spring, purchasing the rundown Circle F ranch adjacent to her property. They'd exchanged pleasantries on occasion, but little more. What Katherine knew of him came mostly through town gossip that he'd fought for the Union in the war, that he'd made a fortune in cattle driving before settling in Wyoming, and that despite his apparent wealth, he worked alongside his men daily. Katherine turned, clutching the shawl to her chest protectively. Forrester stood just inside the doorway, snow melting on the shoulders of his heavy coat, his dark eyes fixed on Peterson rather than her. "Mr. Forrester," Peterson said, his tone suddenly respectful, "just doing business." Forrester stepped forward, removing his gloves. His hands were large but unexpectedly elegant, with long fingers bearing the calluses of hard work. "The lady needs firewood, I take it?" Katherine lifted her chin, pride warring with desperation. "My business is with Mr. Peterson." Forrester's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Miss Blackburn, you're freezing half to death. I can see it from here. I'm managing just fine." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Clearly." He turned back to Peterson. "How much wood does the lady need?" Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "We were discussing a cord." Forrester nodded. "Load a full cord on my wagon. I'll take it out to Miss Blackburn's place." Katherine stepped forward. "Mr. Forrester, I don't accept charity." "I'm not offering charity." He reached for the shawl, his fingers brushing hers as he lifted it from her grasp. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her frozen limbs. "This is worth far more than a cord of wood. I'll take it as payment for the lumber." "And what would a man like you want with a woman's shawl?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. His dark eyes met hers directly. "I'd be honored to purchase it as a gift for my sister in Denver. Her birthday approaches." Katherine hesitated. The idea of parting with her mother's shawl hurt deeply, but the prospect of freezing to death hurt more. "A cord and a half," she countered, "and delivered today." The men by the stove chuckled at her negotiation, but Forrester's expression remained serious. "A cord and a half it is. I'll deliver it personally." "That's not necessary." "I can manage, Miss Blackburn," he interrupted gently. "You're trying to sell your shawl for firewood. That tells me everything I need to know about your situation." His voice softened further so only she could hear. "You'll be warm in my home." Katherine blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly. "I beg your pardon, my ranch house," he clarified, though something in his eyes suggested his slip had been intentional. "I've got room. You shouldn't be alone in this weather." "I couldn't possibly." "Then I'll deliver the wood to your cabin," he said, conceding without argument. "But my offer stands. Sometimes pride isn't worth the price." 2 hours later, Katherine stood in her doorway watching as Forrester and one of his ranch hands stacked the wood neatly alongside her cabin. The snow had stopped, but the temperature continued to drop as the sun sank toward the horizon. Forrester worked efficiently, his breath clouding in the frigid air. When the job was finished, he approached her door, removing his hat. Close up, she could see the flecks of gray at his temples, though he couldn't be much past 30. His face was tanned and weathered from years outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "That should see you through a couple weeks, Miss Blackburn." "Thank you," she said stiffly, uncomfortable with the debt she felt she now owed. "Would you and your man care for some coffee before you head back?" "That would be mighty welcome." Inside, Katherine busied herself with the percolator, grateful that she'd thought to keep water heating on the stove. The cabin was still cold, but with fresh wood in the stove, it would warm quickly. Forrester and his ranch hand, a young man introduced as Charlie, sat at her small table, looking oversized in the modest space. "How long have you been out here alone, Miss Blackburn?" Forrester asked as she served the coffee. "Since August," she replied. "When my father passed." Forrester nodded slowly. "That's a long time to manage a homestead alone." "I'm managing fine." The defensive note in her voice was automatic. "Of course." He sipped his coffee. "Your pies are becoming famous in these parts. Have you considered selling more of your baking?" Katherine paused. "I've sold what I can when I have ingredients. The ranch could use a regular supply of baked goods. My men would pay well." She regarded him suspiciously. "Are you offering me work, Mr. Forrester?" "I'm suggesting a business arrangement. I provide flour, sugar, and such. You provide pies and bread. We split the profits. You wouldn't have to sell family heirlooms for necessities." The offer was more tempting than she wanted to admit. "And what would you gain from this arrangement?" "Happy ranch hands," he replied with a smile. "And perhaps occasional invitations to dinner." The boldness of his statement caught her off guard. "Mr. Forrester, if you're suggesting, I'm suggesting that we both might benefit from neighborly company," he clarified. "Nothing improper." Katherine considered him, trying to determine his true intentions. There had been other offers from men in town, most far less respectable since her father's death. Lonely men seeking housekeepers who would warm their beds. But Forrester's gaze held no such calculation. "I'll consider it," she said finally. He smiled, finishing his coffee. "That's all I ask." Standing, he settled his hat back on his head. "We should be going before dark sets in. The offer of shelter at the ranch remains open, Miss Blackburn, no strings attached. I'll be fine here," she assured him. "But thank you." After they'd gone, Katherine wrapped herself in a blanket and sat beside the newly stoked stove. The heat felt glorious after days of bitter cold. As she warmed her hands, she found herself thinking of Vincent Forrester, of his unexpected kindness, and the strange comment about her being warm in his home. Most puzzling was her own reaction to him, a flutter of something she hadn't felt since before leaving Boston. "Don't be ridiculous," she murmured to herself. "The man bought your mother's shawl, nothing more." But as the cabin slowly warmed, Katherine couldn't help wondering what life might be like in a home that wasn't empty. The following week brought clear skies but temperatures that remained well below freezing. Katherine ventured into town only once, to purchase supplies with money she'd saved from selling pies to passing travelers. Each time she passed Peterson's store, she felt a pang of loss for her mother's shawl, but she pushed the feeling aside. Survival came first. On her 7th day without seeing another soul, a knock at her door startled her from kneading dough. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find Vincent Forrester standing there, holding a wooden crate. "Mr. Forrester," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" He lifted the crate slightly. "Business proposition. May I come in?" Katherine hesitated before stepping aside. The cabin was warmer now, with the stove burning steadily, but she was conscious of how small and plain it must look to a man who owned thousands of acres and a proper ranch house. Forrester set the crate on her table. "I brought supplies: flour, sugar, butter, dried fruits." He gestured to the contents. "As discussed." "I don't recall agreeing to your proposition," she said, though she eyed the supplies hungrily. Her own stores were running dangerously low. "Consider it a trial," he suggested. "Make a few pies, see how quickly they sell. If you're not satisfied with the arrangement, there's no obligation to continue." The offer was too practical to refuse, and Katherine found herself nodding. "Very well, a trial." Forrester smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "Excellent. I'll return in 2 days to collect whatever you've prepared." He paused. "How are you faring with the firewood?" "Well enough. It should last another week if I'm careful." He nodded, glancing around the cabin. "Your place needs weatherproofing. The wind's getting through those walls something fierce. I could send Charlie over to help seal the worst spots." "That's not necessary," Katherine said quickly. "It's practical, Miss Blackburn. You'll burn through wood twice as fast with those drafts." She wanted to refuse, but he was right. "I can pay him for his time. Consider it part of our business arrangement." Forrester moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the latch. "Have you lived in Wyoming long, Miss Blackburn?" "Just over a year. We came from Boston after my mother passed." "Boston," he repeated, nodding as though that explained something. "Quite different from Sweetwater." "Yes," she agreed, the single word insufficient to express how profound that difference truly was. "Do you miss it?" "Boston," Katherine considered the question. "I miss certain comforts, books. Music, conversation, not the people." "Some," she admitted. "But I've found Wyoming people to be honest, direct." Forrester smiled again. "A diplomatic way of saying we lack Eastern polish. Perhaps I've come to appreciate directness." "Then you won't mind my saying that I've enjoyed this conversation more than any I've had in quite some time," he said, holding her gaze. "And I hope for many more." With that, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving Katherine staring at the closed door, her heart beating a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. True to his word, Charlie arrived the following day and spent several hours sealing cracks in the cabin walls with a mixture of mud, straw, and pine tar. The difference was immediate. The constant whistle of wind through the logs ceased, and the interior temperature rose noticeably. Katherine spent the day baking, using Forrester's supplies to create 6 pies: 3 apple, 2 peach, and 1 blackberry. The familiar work soothed her, reminding her of happier times in her mother's kitchen in Boston. By evening, the cabin was filled with delicious aromas, and for the first time in months, Katherine felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. When Forrester returned as promised, his appreciative inhale upon entering the cabin sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Miss Blackburn, if these taste half as good as they smell, you'll have my men fighting over every slice." She couldn't help smiling. I hope they meet expectations. He examined the pies arranged on her table. 6 pies in one day, you've been busy. I enjoy baking, she said simply. It reminds me of home. Forrester nodded, studying her face. Boston or here, the question caught her off guard. Both, I suppose, though this place still feels temporary. And what would make it feel permanent? Katherine hesitated. I'm not sure such a thing is possible anymore. Something like understanding flashed in his eyes. I felt that way once, after the war, like I was just passing through life, not really living it. What changed? I decided to stop waiting for life to happen to me. He gestured around, bought this land, started building something that would outlast me, a legacy. A home, he corrected gently. Legacy comes later. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt the conversation had shifted to territory both more intimate and dangerous than she'd intended. She looked away first. The pies should cool before transport, she said, returning to practical matters. Forrester accepted the change of subject gracefully. I brought a special crate for them, lined with straw to keep them stable on the ride back. As they carefully packed the pies, their hands occasionally brushed, each contact sending a current of awareness through Katherine. She told herself it was merely the novelty of human touch after months of isolation, but the explanation felt hollow. I nearly forgot, Forrester said as he prepared to leave. I brought something else. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. For you. Katherine accepted it cautiously. Mr. Forrester, this isn't part of our arrangement. It's not a gift, exactly, more of a return. Puzzled, she unwrapped the package to find her mother's shawl, the crimson silk gleaming in the lantern light. She looked up at him, speechless. My sister's birthday isn't for months, he explained. And she's never been one for fine things anyway. This belongs with you. Katherine's fingers closed around the familiar fabric. I can't accept this. Our agreement stands as is. The wood is paid for with your baking. He hesitated. I realized after taking it that some things have value beyond their price. I shouldn't have asked for it in the first place. Tears threatened, and Katherine blinked them back. Thank you, she whispered. This means more than I can express. Forrester nodded once, as though embarrassed by her emotion. I should go before dark. I'll return in 3 days for more pies if that suits. Yes, that would be fine. At the door, he paused again. Miss Blackburn, Katherine, if I may, the invitation to the ranch remains open. Not just during storms, anytime you find yourself wanting company. The use of her given name should have offended her, but instead it warmed her. Thank you, Mr. Forrester. Vincent, he corrected with a small smile. If we're to be business partners, we should dispense with formalities. After he left, Katherine sat holding the shawl, running her fingers over her mother's careful embroidery. The gesture of returning it spoke of a consideration she'd rarely encountered in men, certainly not in Wyoming. Vincent Forrester was proving to be far more complex than town gossip suggested. The pie business flourished over the following weeks. Katherine expanded her offerings to include bread, cookies, and on special occasions, cakes. Vincent handled the distribution, returning every few days with empty containers and new supplies. Their conversations grew longer with each visit, ranging from books they'd read to dreams they'd harbored. Katherine learned that Vincent had been raised in Virginia, had fought reluctantly for the Union despite family pressure to join the Confederacy, and had spent years driving cattle before deciding to establish permanent roots. He spoke little of the war, but occasionally let slip comments that revealed deep scars from the experience. In turn, she told him of her sheltered Boston upbringing, her father's failed business ventures that had driven them west, and her own abandoned hopes of becoming a teacher. She found herself looking forward to his visits, planning what she would share next, wondering what new facets of his character would emerge. January brought a brief thaw, and Vincent arrived one afternoon with an unexpected proposal. The snows cleared enough to make the ride. Would you consider joining me for dinner at the ranch tomorrow? My cook's been mighty curious about the woman making the pies his boys can't stop talking about. Katherine hesitated. Accepting an invitation to a single man's home would raise eyebrows in town, but she found herself caring less about gossip with each passing day. "I'd be delighted," she said finally. The Circle F ranch house was larger than she'd imagined, a two-story structure of squared logs with a wide porch and glass windows. As Vincent helped her down from his wagon, Katherine felt a flutter of nerves. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "Too rustic for Boston sensibilities." He teased. "Too grand," she corrected. "I'd pictured something more utilitarian." Vincent's expression softened. "I spent enough years in tent camps and bunkhouses. When I built this place, I wanted something that would feel like home." Inside, the house was a blend of frontier practicality and unexpected refinement. Solid furniture built to last was softened by colorful woven blankets. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main room, filled with volumes Katherine hadn't seen since leaving Boston. A piano stood in one corner, its polished surface gleaming in the firelight. "You play?" she asked, surprised. "Poorly," Vincent admitted with a laugh. "But I enjoy music. Do you? I had lessons as a girl, though I'm terribly out of practice. Would you play for me sometime?" He asked, his voice lowering slightly. The request felt intimate, like a window into a future Katherine hadn't allowed herself to imagine. "Perhaps," she said softly. Dinner was served by a cheerful Mexican man introduced as Miguel, who beamed when Katherine complimented his cooking. The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, accompanied by wine Vincent claimed to have brought all the way from California. As they ate, Katherine found herself relaxing, laughing more freely than she had in years. Vincent was an attentive host, filling her glass and encouraging her to tell stories of her childhood in Boston. In the warm glow of lantern light, with good food and conversation, the hardships of her cabin seemed distant and unimportant. After dinner, Vincent showed her his library, pulling books from shelves with obvious pride. "This one came from New Orleans," he said, handing her a leather-bound volume of poetry. "And this set all the way from San Francisco. You've traveled extensively," she observed. "The war gave me a taste for movement," he said, his expression momentarily distant. "It took years to learn how to stay in one place again. And now, do you still feel that restlessness?" Vincent met her gaze directly. "Less each day." The admission hung between them, charged with meaning. Katherine looked away first, running her fingers along the spines of his books. "You could borrow any that interest you," he offered. "I'd be happy to bring them when I collect the pies." "I'd like that," she said, selecting a novel she'd heard of but never read. Later, as they sat before the fire, Vincent surprised her by asking, "Have you considered what you'll do when spring comes?" Katherine stiffened slightly. "Continue as I have been, I suppose. Managing the homestead alone. Is there an alternative?" Vincent set down his coffee cup. "Several, I'd imagine. You could sell the property, return to Boston." The suggestion cut deeper than expected. "Is that what you think I should do?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm merely curious about your plans." "My plans died with my father," she admitted. "Since then, I've been existing, not living." Vincent nodded slowly. "I recognize the condition." After a pause, he added, "What if you had a partner for the homestead?" Katherine's heart quickened. "What sort of partner?" "A business partner, initially," he said carefully. "Someone to help with the heavy work, provide protection, share the burden." "And in return," Vincent hesitated, "companionship, a home that's more than just shelter." The implication was clear, though delicately phrased. Katherine studied his face in the firelight, searching for signs of the calculation she'd seen in other men's offers. Instead, she found only sincere intensity and something that might have been vulnerability. "Vincent," she said slowly, "are you proposing an arrangement?" "I'm suggesting a beginning," he replied, with the hope that it might lead to something more permanent. The directness she'd earlier admired now took her breath away. "We've known each other hardly a month. I knew within a week," he said simply. "Knew what?" "That you were someone I could build a life with." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I'm not asking for immediate commitment, Catherine, just permission to court you properly, to see if what I feel might be returned, Catherine's mind raced. The practical considerations were overwhelming her precarious situation, the homestead's uncertain future, the town gossip that would surely follow. Yet beneath those concerns lay a simpler truth. She was drawn to this man in ways she couldn't fully explain. "I'm not sure what to say," she admitted. "Then say nothing yet," Vincent suggested. "Take time to consider. I've waited this long, I can be patient a while longer." The ride back to her cabin that night was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they arrived, Vincent helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for tonight," Catherine said. "It was enlightening," Vincent smiled. "Is that good or bad?" "I'm still deciding," he nodded, accepting her uncertainty. "I'll return in 3 days for the pies. And perhaps an answer." "Perhaps," she agreed. Standing in her doorway, watching his wagon disappear into the darkness, Catherine felt as though her life had suddenly shifted course. The future, which had seemed so bleakly predetermined just weeks ago, now held possibilities she'd scarcely dared to imagine. The next 3 days passed in a blur of baking and reflection. Catherine found herself examining her feelings for Vincent with the same careful attention she gave to her pie crusts. She'd come to Wyoming reluctantly, dragged by her father's dreams, and had stayed out of necessity after his death. The idea of choosing to remain, of building a life here voluntarily, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. When Vincent arrived on the 3rd day, Catherine was waiting on her porch despite the cold. He pulled the wagon to a stop, studying her expression with obvious concern. "You've made a decision," he said, not a question. "I have." Catherine took a deep breath. "I'd like to accept your offer of courtship with one condition." Relief washed over his features. "Name it." "I want to maintain my independence, my home, my business during this courtship. If things progress as you hope, we can discuss other arrangements." Vincent nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Your strength is part of what draws me to you, Catherine. I'd never ask you to surrender it." He climbed down from the wagon and approached her, removing his hat. Standing before her on the porch steps, he was eye level with her for the first time. "May I?" he asked softly. Catherine nodded, her heart racing as Vincent leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief, but held the promise of deeper passion, carefully restrained. When he pulled back, his eyes were darker than before. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you clutching that shawl in Peterson's store," Catherine laughed softly. "Is that why you overpaid so dramatically for my firewood?" "I'd have given twice as much for the chance to help you," he admitted. "You looked so determined, so proud even in desperation. I knew then you were someone special. And here I thought it was my pies that won your heart." Vincent's expression grew serious. "It was your courage, Catherine. Everything else, your beauty, your talents, your spirit, I discovered later, but your courage I saw from the first moment." Inside, over coffee and fresh baked bread, they began planning their courtship. Vincent would continue delivering supplies and collecting pies every 3rd day. On Sundays, weather permitting, he would take her to church in town, making their arrangement public. As spring approached, they would discuss combining their properties into a single operation. "My foreman could help manage your land," Vincent suggested. "Your soil's better suited for crops than mine. We could expand your garden, perhaps add chickens." "You've given this considerable thought," Catherine observed, amused. Vincent looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have been planning since December. Since the day we met." "Hope isn't a sin, Catherine." As February turned to March and the worst of winter loosened its grip, their courtship blossomed like the first wildflowers pushing through the melting snow. Catherine began spending more time at the Circle F, initially for dinner, but eventually staying overnight in a guest room when weather threatened. Each visit revealed new aspects of Vincent's character: his patience with young ranch hands, his fairness with business partners, his unexpected tenderness toward injured animals. For his part, Vincent became a frequent visitor at Catherine's cabin, often arriving with small gifts, a book of poetry, a jar of honey, once even a kitten found in his barn. More precious than these offerings was the help he provided repairing her roof, digging a proper garden plot, showing her how to shoot the revolver he insisted she keep for protection. By April, their feelings for each other had deepened beyond the initial attraction. Katherine found herself thinking of Vincent throughout her days, looking forward to his arrival with an eagerness that sometimes frightened her in its intensity. Vincent made no attempt to hide his devotion, openly courting her with a sincerity that earned approving nods even from the most gossip-prone townspeople. On a warm evening in early May, Vincent took Katherine riding to a hilltop overlooking both their properties. The land stretched out before them, greening with spring's promise, the boundaries between his ranch and her homestead invisible from this vantage point. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "It's coming alive again," she agreed, breathing in the scent of new grass and wildflowers. Vincent spread a blanket on the ground, and they sat watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. When the first stars appeared, he turned to face her. "Katherine," he began, his voice unusually solemn, "I've been thinking about what you said about existing versus living." She nodded, remembering their conversation from months ago. "Before you, I was existing, building something, yes, but without real purpose beyond survival." He took her hands in his. "You've shown me what living truly means, sharing hopes, creating something together, finding joy in small moments." Katherine squeezed his hands, her throat tight with emotion. "I don't want to go back to merely existing," Vincent continued. "I want a life, a real life with you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I had this made in Cheyenne." From the pouch, he produced a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Katherine Blackburn, will you marry me? Not because you need security or protection, but because together we can build something neither of us could create alone." Tears filled Katherine's eyes as she looked from the ring to Vincent's face, open and vulnerable in the fading light. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The simple gold band slid perfectly onto her finger. Vincent gathered her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than the careful embraces they'd shared during their courtship. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. "When we met, you were trying to sell your shawl for Firewood. And you said I'd be warm in your home," she recalled with a smile. "Was that a proposal even then?" "A hope," he corrected. "One I wasn't sure would ever come true." Katherine touched his face gently. "I never imagined finding love in Wyoming. It seemed as barren as the winter landscape. And now," she looked out over the greening land, their two properties stretching toward the horizon. "Now I see the beauty that was always here, waiting to emerge." They were married 2 weeks later in Sweetwater's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore her mother's shawl over a simple white dress, and Vincent stood tall in a new suit ordered from Denver. Their vows, spoken clearly and without hesitation, echoed in the wooden structure, promises of fidelity and partnership that both intended to keep for a lifetime. That evening, Vincent carried Katherine across the threshold of the ranch house, their home now, though they'd decided to maintain her cabin as a guest house and occasional retreat. As he set her gently on her feet in the main room, Katherine noticed changes, vases of wildflowers on every surface, new curtains at the windows, her books mixed with his on the shelves. "When did you do all this?" she asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Miguel and the boys helped," Vincent admitted. "I wanted it to feel like our home, not just mine that you're joining." Katherine moved to the piano in the corner, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "Do you still want me to play for you, more than anything?" She sat on the bench, adjusting her skirts, and began to play a gentle melody, a lullaby her mother had taught her long ago. Vincent stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders, and Katherine felt the final pieces of her heart knitting back together after years of loss and uncertainty. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness, Vincent's arms wrapped protectively around her. Katherine thought of the desperate woman who had trudged through snow clutching a silk shawl, certain that death awaited. How far she had come from that moment of despair to this one of complete contentment. "What are you thinking?" Vincent murmured against her hair. "That sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms," she replied. "A stranger offering firewood when what you really needed was hope." Vincent tightened his embrace. "I needed you as much as you needed me, Katherine, maybe more." "We saved each other," she agreed. Outside, spring winds whispered through the new leaves, carrying promises of summer abundance. Within the sturdy walls of their home, Katherine and Vincent Forrester began writing the first chapter of a love story neither had dared to imagine just months before, a story that would eventually fill the house with children's laughter and stretch across decades of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. But in that moment, with the memory of winter's cruel grip still fresh, the simple warmth of being together was miracle enough.